Officer Daniel never imagined that a normal patrol would turn into the most emotional night of his life. Out of the shadows came a tiny puppy, shaking, crying, refusing to let him go. At first, he thought it was lost. But when the pup began pulling him urgently toward the woods, Daniel sensed something was terribly wrong. What he discovered hidden in the darkness left him breathless. A heartbreaking fight for survival, a mother's silent plea, and a loyalty so pure it would bring him to his knees. This was no ordinary call. It was a miracle in disguise. The sun dipped low over the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the quiet town. Officer Daniel adjusted his patrol cap as he stepped off the last sidewalk of his evening route. It had been an uneventful shift, no calls, no emergencies, just the kind of calm every officer secretly hoped for but rarely got. He breathed out, ready to head home, and put his feet up after hours of walking the streets in heavy boots. But just as he turned the corner toward his parked patrol car, something stirred in the distance. At first, it was nothing more than a faint shuffling sound. Daniel slowed, tilting his head, his senses sharpened from years on the job. From the edge of the dusty road, a tiny figure appeared, small, fragile, its little paws kicking up specks of dirt as it stumbled forward. A puppy, not more than a few weeks old, with floppy ears too big for its head and eyes that glistened like pools of midnight. Daniel froze, blinking in surprise. Puppies weren't a common sight out here, especially not wandering alone. He crouched slightly, his hand automatically brushing against the radio clipped to his chest. "Hey, little guy," he murmured, voice soft, careful. To his amazement, the puppy didn't run. Instead, it waddled straight toward him, its tiny legs moving with clumsy determination. It stopped just inches away, tilted its head up, and let out the faintest whimper. Something about that sound made Daniel's chest tighten. He reached out a hand, but before he could touch it, the puppy spun around and walked a few steps away, then stopped, looking back as if expecting him to follow. Daniel chuckled under his breath. "What are you trying to do, huh? Let me somewhere." He straightened, half expecting the pup to lose interest and run off, but it didn't. Instead, it barked a sharp, tiny yelp that echoed louder than it should have in the empty street, and then walked forward again, glancing back with urgency. He sighed, shaking his head. Persistent little thing. But there was something different in that persistence. This wasn't the random wandering of a stray searching for scraps. No, this puppy wanted something, needed something, and for reasons he couldn't quite explain, Officer Daniel felt an unease begin to creep into his bones. Daniel followed the pup a few careful steps, expecting it to run away like most strays when approached. But to his surprise, the little creature didn't flee. Instead, it stopped suddenly, turned its head, and locked its eyes on him. Its gaze was sharp, unblinking, far too focused for such a young pup. Then, with a sudden bark, it ran ahead again, pausing only when Daniel hesitated. It was as though the tiny animal refused to continue unless he came along. He frowned, hands resting on his duty belt. Something about the behavior unsettled him. Stray dogs usually begged, circled for food, or ran in panic when confronted. But this one didn't want scraps or comfort. It wanted direction. It wasn't wandering aimlessly. It was leading. Daniel's instincts told him to brush it off, to return to his car, and let animal control handle the situation. Yet something deep inside whispered otherwise. The pup barked again, a sharp, insistent cry that cut through the still evening air. Then it walked forward, tail stiff, ears perked like antennas, stopping every few feet to look back at him. Each time Daniel waited, the pup whimpered, pacing in tiny, urgent circles as though begging him to hurry. It was strange, eerily purposeful, almost human in its persistence. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, unease settling deeper in his chest. He'd seen odd things in his career, panicked strays, frightened animals, even injured pets seeking help, but never anything quite like this. "All right, buddy," he muttered under his breath, his voice carrying a mix of curiosity and caution. "You've got my attention. Show me where you want to go." The pup yipped as if in response, then ran ahead once more, paws kicking up small clouds of dust on the fading road. This time, Daniel followed more deliberately, his boots crunching against the gravel. And though he tried to convince himself it was just a lost animal searching for comfort, a gnawing feeling refused to leave his gut. Something wasn't right. The pup wasn't asking for food. It was asking for help. The puppy's paws pattered against the dirt road as it ran ahead, then paused, glancing back to make sure Daniel followed. Each glance carried urgency, as though time itself was slipping away. Daniel adjusted the flashlight at his side, sighing. He knew he should radio this in, but something in his gut told him to trust the animal, and so, with careful steps, he followed. The road narrowed until it curved toward the edge of a dense wooded area. Daniel hesitated. The woods stretched dark and endless, their shadows thickening with every passing second of twilight. He patrolled this area before. Locals avoided it after sunset. Too many stories of coyotes, too many reports of accidents on the unlit trails. But the puppy didn't care. It barked sharply, its tiny body trembling with insistence, then ran between the first cluster of trees. The officer cursed under his breath and stepped forward. Something about the urgency in those cries gnawed at him. Branches brushed against his uniform as he pushed through. The crunch of dry leaves echoed beneath his boots, mixing with the sound of the puppy's hurried steps. Daniel kept his flashlight low, its beams slicing through the underbrush. The air grew colder, the stillness heavier, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The little dog would run ahead a few feet, stop, bark, and wait until he caught up before pressing forward again. It wasn't wandering aimlessly. It was guiding him. Minutes passed, though they felt longer. Each step carried him deeper into the thick shadows. Doubt pricked at his thoughts. What am I doing out here, chasing after a stray? Yet every time he considered turning back, the puppy's sharp cry pulled him onward. Daniel's jaw tightened. He'd learned to trust instincts in his years of service, and tonight his instincts were screaming that this was no ordinary call for attention. The farther he went, the stronger the pull in his chest became. Something or someone was waiting at the end of this path. The deeper Daniel went, the quieter the forest became. The soft crunch of his boots and the rapid patter of the puppy's paws were the only sounds breaking the eerie stillness. Even the wind seemed to hush, as though the trees themselves leaned closer, listening. His flashlight beam cut across tangled branches and damp earth, the cone of light catching flecks of dust and insects that floated like tiny ghosts. Then suddenly, he froze. From somewhere up ahead, faint and fragile, came a sound that wasn't the puppy's bark. At first, he thought he'd imagined it, an echo, a trick of the woods. But then it came again, a soft, broken whimper, different, deeper. It wasn't the voice of a young pup, but something older, weaker, heavier with pain. Daniel's pulse quickened. He lifted his flashlight higher, his jaw tightening as he scanned the shadows. The puppy barked once sharply and sprinted forward toward the sound. "Wait," Daniel called out, quickening his steps to follow. The whimper returned, and this time it was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was suffering in the dark. The beam of light shook as Daniel's hand trembled, adrenaline surging through him. He swallowed hard, forcing his breath steady. This was no longer just a curious detour. His instinct screamed that the little pup wasn't leading him on a game. It was leading him to a truth. He pressed onward, branches snapping underfoot, his heart pounding in rhythm with the cries. The sound grew louder, more desperate, each whimper cutting through the silence like a plea. The puppy stopped just ahead, tail stiff, ears alert, and barked with renewed urgency, as if begging Daniel to hurry. Daniel narrowed his eyes, sweeping the flashlight across a cluster of fallen branches and overgrowth. For a split second, the forest floor seemed still, just dirt, rocks, and tangled brush. But then, in the corner of the light's reach, something shifted. A shape, barely visible, trembled weakly in the shadows. His breath caught in his throat as the truth began to take form. It wasn't just another animal. It was something bigger, fragile and broken, hidden beneath nature's debris. The puppy whimpered again, circling the spot, pawing desperately at the ground. Daniel's chest tightened, dread and compassion colliding in his heart. He gripped the flashlight tighter, knowing he was about to uncover something that would change this night forever. Daniel's flashlight beam steadied on the trembling shape beneath the brush. Slowly, he pushed forward, his boots crunching softly on the damp forest floor. The puppy barked once, high-pitched and sharp, then whined as it pawed frantically at the tangled branches. With one quick motion, Daniel knelt down and swept his light across the ground. His breath caught instantly. Beneath a fallen cluster of branches, barely visible, lay the thin frame of a German shepherd. Her fur was matted, patches missing, her body frighteningly thin. She struggled weakly, every shallow breath rattling through her ribs. The sight pierced Daniel's heart. He dropped to one knee, leaning closer as the mother dog lifted her head slightly, her eyes glassy but aware. In that quick moment, there was no mistaking it. The puppy belonged to her. She gave a faint, desperate whimper, as if begging him to understand. The pup rushed to her side, pressing its tiny body against her muzzle, licking her face furiously, as though trying to will her back to life. Daniel's chest tightened until he could barely breathe. This wasn't just a stray wandering the streets. This was a desperate child pleading for someone to save its mother. His throat burned as he reached forward, gently brushing away the smaller branches trapping her. She flinched at the sudden movement, but her eyes never left his. They weren't the eyes of a wild animal. They were the eyes of a mother who had fought too long, too hard, and was now at the edge of giving up. Daniel bit down hard, emotion flooding his chest. He could almost hear her silent words. "Please don't let my baby be alone." He swallowed, his voice low and steady. "It's okay, girl. You held on long enough. I've got you now." The puppy whimpered louder, circling Daniel before burying itself against the mother's weak frame. The tiny cries tore through the silence of the woods, pulling at every fiber of his soul. Daniel fought back tears, reaching down to stroke the mother's head gently. Her ears flicked weakly under his touch, and she let out a small sigh, as though relieved that someone had finally come. He breathed out sharply, his mind racing. She was malnourished, dehydrated, and possibly injured from being pinned beneath the branches. But despite her weakness, despite her pain, she had survived long enough for her pup to find help. Daniel straightened slightly, his determination hardening. There was no way he was leaving them here. The little one hadn't given up, and now neither could he. He reached for his radio, his voice firm, though his throat was tight. "Dispatch, this is Officer Daniel. I've got an emergency. Injured animal, adult female dog, near Forest Edge Trail. Request immediate rescue assistance." Static crackled in response, but he barely heard it. His focus remained on the fragile pair before him, the loyal pup, the fading mother, and the bond that had carried them both through unthinkable odds. Daniel kept one hand on the radio, the other resting gently on the mother dog's trembling side. The dispatcher's voice came through with static. "Rescue will be dispatched. Estimated arrival, 2 hours." His jaw clenched. 2 hours. She didn't have 2 hours. He glanced down at the frail German shepherd, her chest heaving with each labored breath, then at the puppy pawing anxiously at her neck. Time was slipping through his fingers, and with it, 2 lives. His heart pounded with a single terrifying realization. If he waited, she would not survive. He shoved the radio back onto his belt and scanned the surrounding area, his mind racing. The branches pinning her down weren't impossibly heavy, but combined with her weakness and injuries, they were a death sentence. He stripped off his jacket, folding it into a makeshift cushion, and slid it carefully beneath her head. "Stay with me, girl. Don't give up now," he whispered, his voice rough with urgency. The pup barked once, a sharp cry as if echoing his command. Daniel drew in a deep breath and planted his hands firmly against the largest branch. Every muscle in his body strained as he pushed. The wood groaned, resisting, its weight digging into the earth. His arms trembled, sweat beading on his forehead, but he refused to quit. The dog whimpered softly, her eyes following his every move, fragile hope flickering in her gaze. Come on," Daniel muttered through gritted teeth. With a final heave, the branch shifted, rolling just enough to free her chest. She gasped a weak, rattling breath that made his throat tighten, but she was breathing a little easier now. The puppy immediately pressed closer, licking at her fur as if celebrating the small victory. But Daniel knew it wasn't enough. She was still too weak, too close to the edge. He crouched low, speaking gently. "I'm getting you out of here, both of you." He slid his arms carefully beneath her frail body, cradling her with as much steadiness as he could manage. The weight surprised him. She was lighter than she should have been, a shell of what a strong German Shepherd once was. Yet even so, her frame felt heavy with the responsibility of survival. She whimpered as he lifted, but didn't resist. The puppy ran at his boots, yipping frantically, as though urging him to move faster. Daniel rose to his feet, adjusting her carefully in his arms. The branches and brush that had held her captive now lay scattered behind him, but he didn't look back. Every instinct screamed at him to hurry. The forest path stretched ahead, dark and uneven, but he didn't falter. "Hold on, girl. Just a little longer," he whispered, his voice breaking. The pup ran just ahead, guiding him, its cries echoing through the silent woods. Together, they began the desperate race against time, every step a battle, every second a prayer that he wasn't already too late. The forest seemed endless as Daniel pushed forward, every step harder than the last. The German Shepherd lay limp in his arms, her breath shallow, each exhale rattling against his chest. The puppy ran ahead and circled back, its tiny barks urging him to keep moving faster. Branches snagged his uniform, thorns scraped his arms, but Daniel ignored the sting. His only focus was on keeping her alive long enough to reach safety. The weight wasn't just physical. It pressed against his heart, heavier than any burden he'd carried on duty before. His muscles screamed in protest, shoulders burning as he shifted her to keep her steady. Every few steps, he stumbled over roots hidden beneath the soil, but he never let her slip. Sweat trickled down his face, mixing with the dirt smeared across his skin. He clenched his teeth, his breath coming in harsh gasps. "Don't give up," he whispered down at her, his voice trembling. "I won't let you go. Not tonight." The pup barked once, as if agreeing, then ran ahead, guiding him toward the faint glow of light breaking through the tree-line. But the path grew steeper, the forest floor slick with damp moss. Daniel's boots slipped once, his knees buckling, and for a terrifying second, he almost dropped her. Panic shot through him. He tightened his grip, lowering himself to one knee to steady his breath. The mother dog whimpered faintly, her ears twitching against his arm, and it struck him like a blade. She was still fighting. She hadn't given up, and neither could he. With a sound half-grunt, half-prayer, he pushed back to his feet, forcing his body forward through the pain. Minutes stretched like hours. His arms ached, his back screamed, but he refused to stop. The puppy stayed close, never straying far, its small body trembling with determination. Daniel felt his own eyes sting, not from sweat, but from the raw emotion swelling in his chest. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a fight for family, for loyalty, for love that went beyond words. The forest finally began to thin, moonlight spilling across the trail like a guiding hand. He shifted her one last time in his arms, whispering hoarsely, "Almost there, girl. Almost home." With the pup yipping urgently at his heels, Officer Daniel pressed onward. Every ounce of strength poured into the promise he had silently made to save her life, no matter the cost. The forest finally opened into a clearing, but Daniel's relief was short-lived. In his arms, the German Shepherd's body grew heavier, her shallow breath slowing with every passing second. He stumbled forward, the strain in his muscles nothing compared to the dread pressing down on him. The puppy whined sharply, circling his boots, sensing the urgency that hung in the night air. Daniel muttered under his breath, his voice breaking, "Just hold on a little longer. We're almost out." But even as he spoke, he felt her frame twitch weakly, her head sagging farther against his chest. His heart lurched. He dropped to one knee in the clearing, laying her gently onto the grass. The pup immediately pressed against her, pawing frantically at her muzzle, licking her face as if trying to wake her. She gave a faint whimper, her chest rising unevenly, her eyes fluttering, half closed. Daniel's throat tightened. He yanked off his cap and tossed it aside, running a trembling hand over his face. For the first time all night, doubt clawed its way into his chest. Was he too late? Had the little pup's desperate mission only led him to heartbreak? No, he growled through clenched teeth, pushing the thought away. His training kicked in. He pressed his ear close to her muzzle, listening. Faint, ragged breaths, weak but still there. His pulse raced. She wasn't gone yet. He pulled his jacket tighter around her frail body, tucking it carefully to keep what warmth she had left. "Stay with me, girl," he whispered fiercely. "You fought this long. You're not giving up now." The puppy whined, nestling against her neck, its tiny body shivering in sync with hers. The sight tore at him, a raw reminder of the thin line between life and loss. Gathering his strength, Daniel scooped her back into his arms. His muscles screamed, his vision blurred with exhaustion, but he forced himself upright. He fixed his eyes on the trail ahead, the faint outline of his patrol car barely visible through the trees. Each step forward was a battle, his body threatening to give out, but he refused. Behind him, the forest seemed to close, swallowing the silence once more. Ahead of him, faint hope lingered. The German shepherd let out one weak sigh, her body limp but still alive. The puppy barked once, high-pitched and insistent, as if declaring to the night, "This fight isn't over." Daniel burst from the tree lean, his lungs burning, his arms trembling under the fragile weight of the German shepherd. His patrol car stood just ahead, shining under the pale wash of moonlight. The puppy yipped wildly, running back and forth as if urging him to move faster. Each step felt like forever, his boots pounding the dirt with frantic rhythm. The mother dog stirred faintly in his arms, her shallow breaths rasping against his chest, every sound a reminder of how little time was left. He whispered hoarsely, "Hold on, girl. Just hold on." Reaching the car, he yanked open the back door with his elbow and gently lowered her onto the seat. The pup scrambled in after her, pressing against her side, refusing to let her out of sight. Daniel slid into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and flicked on the siren. The night air split with a wail as the engine roared to life. Gravel sprayed beneath the tires as the patrol car shot forward, headlights cutting a desperate path through the empty road. Every second was a countdown, every mile a test of whether they would reach help in time. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He risked quick glances in the rearview mirror. The puppy paced back and forth across the seat, crying softly, licking at its mother's face between whimpers. She barely moved, her chest rising in shallow, uneven intervals. Daniel's heart thudded painfully in his chest, fear coiling in his stomach. He pressed harder on the accelerator, the siren screaming into the night. "Stay with me," he muttered under his breath, over and over, as if the words alone could tie her life to the world. City lights finally flickered in the distance. The vet hospital's glowing red sign appeared like a beacon, pulling him forward with renewed urgency. Daniel swerved into the lot, brakes screeching as he skidded to a stop. Before the car had fully settled, he was out, scooping her into his arms again. The pup leaped down, following close at his heels. The hospital door slid open, and staff rushed forward at the sight of the sirens and the limp figure in his arms. "Critical," Daniel barked, his voice raw. "She's not breathing right." Within seconds, hands reached for her, lifting her onto a gurney. The pup cried out as the mother disappeared into the bright hallway. Daniel staggered after them, his chest heaving, praying silently that the race against time wasn't already lost. The waiting room felt unbearably still, its clean white walls closing in like a silent prison. Daniel sank into one of the hard plastic chairs, his chest still heaving from the run. The puppy sat at his boots, tiny body trembling, its wide eyes fixed on the hallway where the mother had been rushed away. Every whimper it let out echoed in Daniel's chest, each sound a reminder of the fragile, thread the mother dog clung to. He rubbed a hand across his face, the weight of exhaustion pressing down. But sleep was the last thing on his mind. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, too bright, too harsh. Every tick of the clock on the wall seemed louder, sharper, drilling into his skull. Minutes dragged by like hours. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and let his fingers trail absently over the pup's soft fur. The small creature pressed against his leg, seeking comfort, but giving him just as much in return. He swallowed hard, whispering, "She's strong. She'll pull through. She has to." His voice cracked, betraying the fear gnawing at him. As the minutes stretched, memories began to surface, unwanted, painful. He thought of his own childhood dog, Max, a loyal golden retriever who had been his shadow growing up. He remembered the night Max hadn't come home, the frantic search, and the crushing grief when they found him too late. That wound, buried for years, tore open now, raw and aching. He clenched his fists, forcing the thought away. He refused to believe this night would end the same way. Not after everything. Not after the pup's desperate plea had led him here. The doors at the end of the hallway swung open briefly, a nurse hurrying past, but she didn't stop. Daniel's heart leaped and crashed in the same instant. He breathed out shakily, forcing patience he didn't feel. The pup let out another small cry and looked up at him, eyes shimmering with the same question pounding in his chest. Will she survive? Daniel bent low, pressing his forehead gently to the pup's. She's going to be okay, he whispered, though the words were as much a prayer as a promise. The sound of footsteps broke the heavy silence, echoing down the hallway like a drumbeat against Daniel's nerves. He shot upright in his chair, the puppy springing to its paws beside him. A figure emerged from the double doors, a man in a white coat, his expression unreadable. Daniel's heart thudded painfully. He searched the doctor's face for any sign, any clue, but the stillness in those eyes gave nothing away. The puppy whimpered, its body pressing against Daniel's boot, as if it too could feel the weight of the moment. For what felt like forever, the vet remained silent, pulling off his gloves. Daniel's breath caught, his throat dry. "Tell me," he demanded, though his voice cracked under the strain. The vet finally looked at him, his gaze softening. "She's critical," he said carefully, "but you brought her just in time." The words hit Daniel like a rush of air to lungs that had been locked tight. Relief surged through him, so powerfully his knees almost buckled. He pressed a hand over his face, swallowing back the flood of emotions threatening to break loose. The puppy yipped, tail wagging weakly as if it understood the shift in the air. Daniel crouched, scooping the pup into his hands, hugging it close to his chest. "You did it, little one," he whispered, voice trembling. "You saved her." The pup licked his chin, its small body wiggling with a joy that contrasted sharply against the heaviness of the night. Daniel laughed weakly, a choked sound that was half tears, half relief. For the first time since the chase began, he allowed himself to breathe. The vet crouched beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "She's not out of danger yet," he warned gently, "but she has a fighting chance because of you." Daniel nodded, eyes glistening. He looked down at the puppy, whose gaze never left the hallway where its mother lay. "Because of us," he corrected softly, and in that quiet waiting room, surrounded by shadows of fear and sparks of hope, he felt the truth settle deep in his heart. Sometimes the smallest, weakest voice could lead to the strongest miracle. Days slipped by in a blur of quiet visits and careful monitoring. Each morning and evening, Daniel returned to the small recovery room where the German Shepherd lay, her body wrapped in warm blankets. Machines hummed softly beside her, keeping track of every fragile heartbeat. The puppy never left her side, curling against her chest, its tiny body rising and falling with hers, as if trying to breathe life back into her. The sight tugged at Daniel's heart every time, reminding him that even in weakness, love could be the strongest tie of all. At first, progress was painfully slow. She could barely lift her head, her eyes clouded with exhaustion. Nurses brought bowls of water and small portions of food, but it took coaxing and patience to get her to eat. Daniel sat with her through all, his large hands resting gently on her frail frame, whispering encouragement she may or may not understand. "That's it, girl. Just one more bite," he'd murmur, watching the pup lick her muzzle as if cheering her on. And somehow, little by little, she responded. By the end of the week, the change was undeniable. Her eyes, once dull and lifeless, began to brighten with careful light. She moved her paws more, testing her strength, and even managed to lift herself halfway into a sitting position. The puppy barked excitedly, tail wagging furiously, pressing its nose against hers in triumph. Daniel felt his chest swell with relief and pride, his own eyes stinging as he watched the miracle unfold before him. The bond between mother and pup was unbreakable, and he realized he had been pulled into it too, woven into their fight for survival. One evening, as the sun dipped low and golden light filtered through the blinds, Daniel entered the room to find her standing unsteadily, the puppy bouncing around her paws. She wobbled, but she stood. For a moment, he simply froze, overwhelmed by the sight. Then with a soft laugh, he crouched down and opened his arms. The mother dog hobbled forward, pressing her head into his chest while the puppy yipped happily at his side. Daniel held them both, his throat tight with emotion. In that moment, he knew they weren't just healing. They were becoming a family. By the second week, the recovery room felt less like a hospital ward and more like a second home. Daniel had claimed a corner chair, worn from his constant visits, where he spent hours simply sitting with them. The German Shepherd grew steadier each day, her steps firmer, her eyes brighter. The puppy, once frantic with worry, now bounded happily around her, tugging at her ears, chasing its own tail, always circling back to her side. Watching them, Daniel felt something stir inside him, something deeper than duty, stronger than obligation. One afternoon, as he scratched the pup behind its floppy ears, a thought settled over him with quiet certainty. He couldn't let them go. They weren't strays anymore. They weren't just rescues. They were his. The realization brought both warmth and fear. He had dedicated his life to serving others, often at the expense of personal attachments. But now, looking at the way the mother pressed her muzzle into his hand, and how the pup wagged furiously at the sound of his voice, he understood they had already chosen him. The paperwork was surprisingly simple. When the vet asked if he wanted to begin the adoption process, Daniel didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said firmly, his chest swelling with resolve. The staff smiled knowingly. They had seen the bond forming long before he admitted it. The next few days were filled with forms, signatures, and preparations. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the look in their eyes when he walked through the door, the unconditional trust that spoke louder than words. The day finally came when he led them out of the hospital. The mother walked slowly but proudly beside him, her pup bouncing ahead on clumsy paws, the leash slack in Daniel's steady hand. The evening sun painted the sky in gold, casting their shadows long on the pavement. Daniel glanced down at them, his lips curving into a rare, unguarded smile. "Let's go home," he whispered, and as the puppy barked and the mother leaned gently against his leg, he knew the bond was sealed. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were family. The first night at home was quiet, almost too quiet. Daniel sat on his couch, the room dimly lit by the soft glow of a single lamp. The German Shepherd rested at his feet, her body curled protectively around her pup, who had already fallen into a deep sleep. For the first time in weeks, the constant hum of worry was gone. Yet in its place came a wave of emotions Daniel had been holding back. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as the silence pressed against him. Memories of the night in the woods came rushing back, the desperate cries, the struggle against the branches, the weight of her limp body in his arms. His chest tightened as he replayed it all, every detail sharper now that the immediate danger had passed. He realized just how close he had come to losing them, how easily the story could have ended in heartbreak. His hands shook as he ran them over his face, his throat tightening with the words he couldn't say. For years, he had built walls around himself, walls meant to keep pain out. But tonight, those walls finally cracked. Tears blurred his vision before he could stop them. He bent down, resting a hand gently on the shepherd's head. She lifted her eyes, soft and knowing, and pressed her muzzle into his palm. That simple gesture undid him completely. His voice broke as he whispered, "You saved me too." The pup stirred at the sound of his voice, climbing clumsily onto his lap, its small tongue brushing against his cheek. Daniel laughed through his tears, holding the pup to his chest while the mother leaned closer, her steady gaze holding his broken heart together. In that fragile, tear-streaked moment, Daniel understood the truth. The little puppy hadn't just rescued its mother. It had rescued him. It had reminded him that love, loyalty, and family could be found even in the darkest nights. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, pulling the two closer into his arms. "We're in this together now," he murmured, voice trembling but sure. And as the room filled with the quiet rhythm of their breaths, Daniel felt whole in a way he hadn't in years. The days that followed were filled with a new kind of rhythm, one Daniel had never known he needed. Morning patrols were now followed by playful barks echoing through his small home, the puppy tumbling across the floor in endless bursts of energy. The mother dog, though still healing, grew stronger with each passing day, her once fragile steps now steady and proud. Every time Daniel returned from work, he was greeted not by silence, but by wagging tails and eyes that glowed with recognition. The emptiness that had once haunted his home had been replaced by warmth. Neighbors soon noticed the change, too. They saw the officer who had once walked alone, now moving with two loyal companions at his side. Children smiled as the pup bounded toward them, while adults nodded in respect at the shepherd's calm, protective presence. For Daniel, it was more than companionship. It was a family he hadn't realized he was missing. The bond forged in desperation had blossomed into something unshakable. Every glance, every touch carried a story of survival, loyalty, and love stronger than circumstance. One evening, as Daniel sat on his porch watching the sunset bleed across the horizon, the puppy curled in his lap while the shepherd lay beside his chair, he found himself whispering words meant as much for the world as for them. Sometimes the smallest cries lead us to the biggest miracles. The wind carried his voice softly, but he knew its truth rang louder than any siren. What began as a desperate chase through the woods had become a journey that mended hearts, hers, the pup's, and his own. And so their story became a reminder to everyone who heard it that loyalty has no language, that love appears in the most unexpected forms, and that even the weakest voices can call us towards something greater. Daniel had gone into the night as a weary officer, ready to end his shift. But he emerged with a family, forever changed. As the screen fades, a final message lingers. Cherish the bonds you're given, because sometimes they aren't just saving them, they're saving you.